When I agreed to babysit my neighbor's kids, I didn't expect to get tied to a chair in their kitchen 3 hours later. My neighbor called me one afternoon completely panicking. "I'm so sorry, but my husband just had a heart attack. I need to get him to the hospital. Can you please watch my kids?" We weren't exactly close, but I had kids of my own and knew what she was going through. I told her not to worry, I'd be over immediately. She thanked me profusely and left the spare key under the door. I grabbed my purse and a few old toys from my kids' old belongings and walked over to my neighbor's house, thinking this would be an ordinary babysitting job. When I stepped inside, something felt off immediately. The kids, Bonnie and Freddie, were sitting on the couch in the dark living room, completely still, staring at the TV. Except the TV wasn't on, just a black screen reflecting their scrawny, pale faces back at them. I stood in the doorway for a moment, waiting for them to turn around or say hello. Nothing. They didn't even blink. I closed the door behind me and the lock clicked loudly. "Hello?" Both heads turned toward me in perfect unison, like someone had pressed a button. Their expressions were blank, eyes empty. I tried to act normal, even though my stomach was churning. "Are you too hungry? I can make dinner." "We don't eat," Bonnie answered quickly. I laughed, thinking they were joking. "Of course you eat, honey. Everyone eats. How about tonight? You can eat anything you want from the pantry," I offered, knowing most kids would jump at the opportunity to empty out the junk food at home. But Bonnie and Freddie just stayed in their place, refusing any kind of meal or snack I offered. I brought them 2 glasses of water instead. But when I set it down on the living room table in front of them, Freddie hissed at it like a cat and kicked it away aggressively. "No food! No drink!" they shouted. I quickly picked up the glass and placed it in the sink, which quieted them down almost instantly. "So, do you guys want to watch a movie or something?" I asked quietly, trying to break the intense silence between us. "We want to read you a story," Bonnie whispered. She ran up the stairs and came back down to hand me a worn copy of Hansel and Gretel. I sat down on the couch, confused, while the kids climbed up next to me. Instead of her normal sweet voice, Bonnie read page after page in a low, almost threatening voice. When she got to the part about the witch's oven, she looked right at me, and the old woman burned up inside. I felt my heart starting to race, quickly realizing that this little favor was turning out into a huge mistake. I excused myself to the bathroom and phoned their mom. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding exhausted. "Hello, Louisa, is everything okay?" "The kids, they're acting really strange," I said quietly, not even sure how to explain everything that had happened tonight. She laughed. "Oh, they get like that sometimes. They're just going through a phase. They're good kids, I promise." Before I could explain further, my phone buzzed. She'd hung up and sent me $500 through Venmo with a note that said, "Thank you so much for helping us. I'll be home in an hour." I sighed, telling myself that it's only going to be 1 more hour. Everything would be all right. But when I stepped out of the bathroom, I quickly realized just how wrong I was. The kids ambushed me, pushing me onto the floor and duct taping me to a kitchen chair. My heart pounded loudly in my ears. Freddie circled around me while Bonnie stood guard by the door. "Are you working with her?" Freddie demanded before ripping off the duct tape from my mouth. I'm only here to babysit," I told them. Bonnie squinted her eyes into a glare. She held up a frying pan to my head. "If you lie to us, we'll hit you. Now tell us, did she send you to finish the job?" "Who? Finish what job?" I asked desperately. "Please, I don't understand what's happening." They looked at each other. Some silent conversation passed between them. Then Bonnie's face crumpled and suddenly she looked like a scared little girl again. "Mother, she's been poisoning us. All of us. For months." My blood ran cold under my skin. "What?" Freddie chimed in. "Dad figured it out last week. He found pills and liquids she'd be putting in our food and drinks. Dad tried confronting her earlier, just 5 hours ago, when she stabbed him. His eyes filled with tears, his entire body trembling lightly. She didn't take him to a hospital. She dragged his body to the car and left to bury him where she buried all the other dads and kids." "Others? There were others? Oh my God." My voice came out strangled. "We need to call the police right now. We have to get out of here." Freddie quickly cut the tape with scissors. I grabbed their hands, ready to step out when we heard it. The sound of tires on gravel. A car door slamming. Bonnie's face went white. "She's home." We all froze, staring at the front door. Footsteps on the porch. Keys jingling. Freddie looked at me with pure terror in his eyes, his small hands holding mine. What do we do? The doorknob started to turn. That's when I decided to do something completely reckless. I grabbed both kids by their shirts and shoved them toward the pantry door. My hands shook so bad I could barely turn the handle. I yanked it open and pushed them inside among the cans and boxes. Bonnie's eyes were huge and wet with tears. Freddie's mouth open like he wanted to scream. I pressed my finger to my lips and whispered as quiet as I could. "Stay silent no matter what you hear. Please." They nodded and I shut the door. My heart beat so hard it hurt my chest. I positioned myself right in front of the pantry door, my back pressed against the wood. If she wanted to get to them, she'd have to go through me first. The front door opened. I heard the rustle of plastic bags. Footsteps in the entryway. I tried to breathe normal, but my lungs felt too small. The mother walked into the kitchen carrying 2 grocery bags. Her face looked perfectly calm. She smiled at me like we were old friends having coffee. She set the bags on the counter and started unpacking them. Milk, bread, eggs. Like this was just a regular Tuesday night. Her voice came out sweet and friendly when she spoke. Where are the children? Her eyes moved around the room. They didn't match her smile. They were cold and sharp, scanning every corner. Looking for something, I forced myself to meet those eyes. The kids are upstairs sleeping. My voice shook even though I tried to control it. Everything went fine tonight. They were really good. She nodded slowly. Her smile got bigger, but it didn't reach her eyes at all. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for watching them on such short notice. She reached for her purse on the counter. Let me pay you for your time. But her other hand moved different. It slid sideways toward the knife block. Her fingers stretched out casual like she wasn't even thinking about it. My stomach dropped. She knew. She knew I was lying about where the kids were. She knew what they told me. Her hand got closer to the biggest knife. The one with the black handle. I didn't think. I just moved. I lunged forward and shoved her as hard as I could. She stumbled backward into the refrigerator. The magnets scattered everywhere. I ran for the front door. My legs felt like they might give out, but I kept moving. I yanked open the pantry door and screamed for the kids to follow me. Bonnie and Freddie burst out. We ran together toward the front door. Behind us, I heard the mother yelling. Her voice wasn't sweet anymore. It was something else. Something that made my skin crawl. We hit the front door and I grabbed the handle. It turned. We burst outside into the night air. The porch light blinded me for a second. I grabbed both kids' hands. We ran down the steps. My feet hit the grass. I pulled them toward my house next door. Bonnie's hand was so small in mine. Freddie kept up, but I could hear him crying. Behind us, the mother's voice got louder. She wasn't pretending anymore. The friendly neighbor mask was completely gone. I heard words I couldn't make out, but the tone was pure rage. My house looked so far away even though it was right there. 20 yards, 15, 10. My lungs burned. Bonnie tripped, but I yanked her back up without stopping. We reached my front door. I fumbled with my keys. My hands wouldn't work right. The keys dropped. I grabbed them off the porch. Found the right one. Shoved it in the lock. The door opened. We fell inside. I slammed it shut behind us and turned the deadbolt. Then the chain lock. Then I ran to the back door and locked it too. Every window I could reach got locked. My hands moved on their own. The kids stood in my living room shaking. I grabbed my phone off the coffee table. My fingers could barely hit the right numbers. 911. The dispatcher answered. I tried to explain, but the words came out wrong. My neighbor just tried to attack me. Her children say she's been murdering people. Please send help. The dispatcher's voice stayed calm. She asked my address. She asked if I was safe right now. She told me to stay on the line. She said help was coming. I looked out my front window. The neighbor's house sat there quiet. No movement. Where was she? Was she coming here? I pulled Bonnie and Freddie close to me. They pressed against my sides. Both of them shook so hard their teeth chattered. 4 minutes later, I saw the lights. Red and blue flashing down our quiet street. 2 patrol cars pulled up fast. 4 officers got out. They had their weapons drawn. I watched them approach the neighbor's house. They moved careful. One went to the front door. Another went around back. 2 stayed in position covering the exits. My heart still wouldn't slow down. The front door of the neighbor's house opened. The mother walked out with her hands up. Her face looked confused, worried, like she had no idea what was happening. She was playing a role again. The officers told her to get on the ground. She did. Slowly, carefully. She kept talking to them. I couldn't hear the words through my window, but I saw her mouth moving, shaking her head, looking upset. One officer handcuffed her while she talked. She gestured toward my house. Her face showed hurt and confusion. She was telling them something about me, about the kids, making herself the victim, making me look crazy. 10 minutes later, another car pulled up. A woman in plain clothes got out. She had dark hair pulled back. She talked to the officers for a minute, then looked toward my house. She walked up my front steps and knocked. I checked through the peephole before opening. She held up a badge. Detective Kira Paget. Can I come in? I opened the door. She stepped inside and her eyes went right to the kids pressed against me. Her face softened. She had kind eyes, but something sharp behind them. Something that made me think she actually understood. She looked at Bonnie and Freddie, then at me. We need to talk to all of you separately. I know this is scary, but I need to hear what happened from each person. Is that okay? I nodded. Bonnie's hand gripped my shirt. Freddie's face was pale. But Detective Paget crouched down to their level. Her voice stayed gentle. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you. I just need you to tell me the truth about what's been happening. Can you do that for me? Bonnie nodded first. Then Freddie. Detective Paget took Bonnie into my kitchen while another officer stayed with Freddie in the living room. A third officer led me upstairs to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of my bed while she pulled out a notebook. She asked me to start from the beginning. I told her everything. The phone call. The strange behavior. The kids tying me up. Their confession about the poisoning. The father's murder. The other victims buried in the yard. My voice shook the whole time, but I got through it. Downstairs, I could hear Bonnie talking. Her voice was so quiet I could barely make out the words through the floor. She was describing the pills, the liquids mixed into drinks. How their mother would watch them after meals to see what happened. How their father started refusing food a week ago after he found the bottles hidden in the basement. My hands clenched into fists on my bedspread. These babies had been living in a nightmare for months while I waved at their mother in the driveway and complained about the weather. The officer finished writing and asked if I needed anything. Water. Medical attention. I shook my head. I just wanted to stay close to Bonnie and Freddie. She nodded and we went back downstairs. Freddie was still talking to his officer. His face was pale, but he kept going, describing the confrontation that afternoon. His mother and father arguing in the kitchen. The knife, the blood, his father falling, his mother dragging the body to the garage. Freddie's voice cracked, but he didn't cry. He just kept talking in this flat, empty tone that made my chest hurt. Detective Paget came out of the kitchen with Bonnie. She looked at me and I saw something hard in her expression. She believed them. She actually believed them. She told the other officers to stay with us while she went next door. I watched through my front window as she crossed the yard. The mother was still sitting in the back of a patrol car. Detective Paget opened the door and crouched down to talk to her. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the mother's face change. The concerned neighbor mask fell away. Her mouth twisted. Her eyes went cold and sharp. Detective Paget stood up and closed the car door. She walked back to my house and came inside. She needed to search the property next door. She'd asked for permission. The mother refused. Detective Paget looked right at me when she said it. That refusal meant something. Innocent people don't refuse searches when their husband is missing and their children are making accusations. She was getting a warrant. It would take a few hours, but she'd have it by morning. She asked if we could stay here tonight. If the kids would be okay. I told her yes. Of course, yes. Bonnie grabbed my hand. Freddie pressed against my other side. Detective Paget's expression softened just a little. She promised someone would be outside all night. We'd be safe. Then she left with the other officers. I locked my doors and checked every window twice. I made the kids sandwiches, but they barely touched them. We ended up on my couch together. Both of them curled against me. I turned on a movie, but nobody watched it. We just sat there in the blue glow while police cars sat outside both houses. I didn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every car driving past made my heart race. But the kids eventually dozed off against me. Exhausted. I held them and watched the sky slowly turn gray through my windows. At dawn, I heard vehicles pulling up outside. I looked out carefully. Detective Paget was back. She had 4 other people with her. They wore jackets that said forensics across the back. They carried equipment, cases, cameras. Detective Paget saw me in the window and gave a small nod. They had the warrant. I watched them walk up to the neighbor's house. One of them used bolt cutters on the garage door. It rolled up slowly. Detective Paget went in first with her flashlight. She was in there maybe 2 minutes. When she came out, her face was different. Harder. She pulled out her radio and said something I couldn't hear. Within 10 minutes, 3 more cars arrived. Crime scene tape went up. More people in forensics jackets swarmed the garage. I pulled back from the window. I didn't want to see any more. But I knew what they'd found. Freddie woke up and looked at me. His eyes were red and puffy. He asked if they found his dad. I nodded. I couldn't lie to him. He'd been right about everything so far. Freddie didn't cry. He just stared at the wall and nodded back, like he'd known all along, but part of him had been hoping he was wrong. Bonnie woke up next. She looked at her brother and then at me. She knew too. We sat together in silence while the crime scene team worked next door. Around noon, Detective Paget knocked on my door. She asked if she could speak to Bonnie. There was something else they needed to find. Bonnie stood up slowly. She looked scared but determined. She told the detective about the shed, the one in the far corner of the backyard behind the trees. Their mother kept it locked. She never let anyone go near it. Bonnie had seen her going in and out at night sometimes, carrying things. Detective Paget thanked her and went back outside. I watched them head to the backyard. They cut the lock off the shed. The door swung open. Even from my window, I could see Detective Paget's reaction. She stepped back, pulled out her phone, made a call. 20 minutes later, a woman in a suit arrived. She went into the shed, came out carrying a clear evidence bag. Inside was a notebook. She was wearing gloves and she held it carefully like it might explode. They kept pulling things out. Bottles, syringes, more notebooks, bags of pills. They filled box after box with evidence. Then someone showed up with a machine on wheels. They started pushing it around the backyard in a grid pattern, the ground-penetrating radar Freddie had mentioned. It beeped and clicked as they moved it slowly across the grass. Every few minutes, they'd stop and mark a spot with a flag. By the time they finished, there were 6 flags scattered across the yard. 6 spots where the ground had been disturbed, where something was buried that shouldn't be there. The excavation started immediately. They brought in people with shovels and screens and more cameras. They worked carefully, slowly, documenting everything. I couldn't watch anymore. I closed the curtains and turned on cartoons for the kids. Tried to create some kind of normal in the middle of this nightmare. But we all knew what was happening outside, what they were digging up. By evening, Detective Paget came back. Her face looked tired. She sat down across from us. They'd found 3 bodies so far. They'd keep digging tomorrow. She was sorry we had to be here for this. Sorry the kids had to know. But she needed to ask more questions. A man arrived right after her. He introduced himself as Julian Ramos from Child Protective Services. He had kind eyes and a gentle voice. He explained that Bonnie and Freddie needed placement, foster care, at least temporarily until everything got sorted out. Bonnie grabbed my hand hard enough to hurt. Freddie pressed against me and wouldn't look at Julian. They didn't want to go with him. They didn't want to leave. Julian looked at me, asked if I'd be willing to keep them here, just for now. Emergency placement. I said yes before he even finished asking. Of course yes. These kids had been through enough. They didn't need strangers right now. They needed someone they trusted. Someone who believed them. Julian nodded. He'd start the paperwork. It wouldn't be official yet, but given the circumstances, he could approve a temporary arrangement. He'd be back tomorrow to check on everyone. After he left, Detective Paget told me the mother was being formally arrested. Multiple counts of murder. They had enough evidence already and more coming. But the mother was still claiming innocence. Still saying the children were disturbed. That I'd manipulated them. That this was all a misunderstanding. Detective Paget's jaw was tight when she said it. She didn't believe a word of it. Nobody did. Not after what they'd found. The next week was a blur. The forensic team worked from dawn until dark every day. They recovered 6 more bodies. 9 total. 4 of them were children. 5 were adults. The medical examiner confirmed they'd all been poisoned. Different substances, different methods, but all showing the same pattern of slow, deliberate poisoning over weeks or months. Detective Paget came by every evening to update me. She was building the case piece by piece. The mother had been targeting vulnerable families. Single parents, widows, people who were isolated or struggling. She'd befriend them, offer help, bring over meals, then slowly poison them while playing the concerned neighbor. She'd taken out life insurance policies on some of the adults, made herself the beneficiary, collected the money after they died. The children were just collateral damage, or maybe experiments. The notebooks documented everything. Dosages, symptoms, effects. She'd been doing this for years, moving from place to place, leaving bodies behind. And nobody had ever connected the dots until Bonnie and Freddie were brave enough to tell the truth. That first night with the kids in my house, I barely slept. Bonnie woke up screaming around 2 a.m, her voice so loud and scared it sent me running down the hall. She was sitting up in bed, eyes wide open but not really seeing anything, yelling that her mother was coming back to finish what she started. I held her close and kept telling her she was safe now, that the police had her mother locked up and she couldn't hurt anyone anymore. But even after she calmed down and her breathing went back to normal, I could see something broken in her eyes that wasn't going to heal anytime soon. She had that same nightmare 3 more times before the sun came up, and each time I rushed in to comfort her and promise her everything would be okay. Meanwhile, Freddie barely said a word for days, just sat at my kitchen table drawing picture after picture with the crayons I'd given him. He drew dark, scary images of things I didn't want to think about, scenes from what he'd seen his mother do. When Melody showed up on the 3rd day to check on them, she sat down next to Freddie and looked through his drawings carefully. She explained to me quietly that this was his way of dealing with everything, that sometimes kids who go through bad things need to get it out on paper before they can start to feel better. The drawings were hard to look at, but she said they were actually helping him process the memories, and later the police would use them as more proof of what had happened. My sister Hadley drove in from 2 states away that same week, showing up at my door with 3 suitcases, and announcing she was staying as long as I needed her. I nearly cried with relief because I was barely holding it together trying to care for 2 kids who'd been through something so awful. Hadley was amazing with Bonnie and Freddie right from the start, patient and gentle in a way that made them feel safe. She'd sit with them for hours, reading books or playing quiet games, never pushing them to talk about anything they weren't ready to share. Having another adult there to help with everything kept me from completely falling apart under the weight of it all. The neighborhood exploded with gossip and shock once news got out about what had been happening right next door to all of us. People I'd known for years started stopping by my house to check on me and the kids, bringing casseroles and offers to help however they could. Everyone was horrified that none of us had noticed anything wrong, that a serial killer had been living among us the whole time. Mrs. Huffman from 3 houses down brought over a whole bag of toys for the kids and told me she felt sick thinking about all those times she'd waved hello to that woman. Mr. Patterson, who lived across the street, kept saying he should have known something was off, that he'd seen strange things late at night but never thought to question them. The support was overwhelming and helpful, but it also made me realize how easy it had been for the mother to hide what she was doing from everyone around her. Detective Paget came by almost every other day to interview me again and again, going over every single detail from that night and everything I'd ever observed about the mother in the months before. She'd sit at my dining room table with her notebook and ask me to remember specific conversations, specific moments, anything that might have seemed unusual at the time. The more we talked, the more I started seeing little warning signs I'd completely missed, like how the mother always insisted on bringing food to neighborhood gatherings but never ate anything anyone else made, or how she'd talked about her previous neighborhoods and mentioned families who'd moved away suddenly, and I'd never thought to question why so many people around her just disappeared. The guilt ate at me every time I remembered something else I should have noticed. Some red flag I'd ignored because I was too busy with my own life to pay attention. The mother's lawyer filed a motion trying to get Bonnie and Freddie's statements thrown out, claiming they were too messed up from everything to be trusted as witnesses. But Detective Paget told me not to worry because the physical evidence backed up every single thing the kids had said. The bodies in the yard, the poison in the shed, the notebooks documenting everything, it all proved they were telling the truth. If anything, their testimony was even stronger now, because the evidence showed they'd been describing real events they'd actually witnessed, not making things up like the lawyer tried to claim. Julian stopped by about 2 weeks after everything happened to talk about what would happen with Bonnie and Freddie long term. He explained that they'd need foster placement, maybe even adoption down the road, and that the state would start looking for the right family to take them in. Then he looked at me seriously and asked if I'd ever considered becoming their foster parent, given how attached they'd become to me and how they didn't want to trust anyone else right now. The question caught me completely off guard, even though part of me had been wondering the same thing. I was scared out of my mind about taking on that kind of responsibility, about whether I could actually handle raising two kids who'd been through something so terrible. But when I thought about sending them to live with strangers, people they didn't know who hadn't been there that night, I knew I couldn't do it. Hadley found me sitting on the back porch later that evening, staring at nothing and trying to figure out what to do. She sat down next to me and said she thought I should say yes, that those kids needed me, and she could see how much I already cared about them. She promised she'd stay and help me through the whole fostering process, that I wouldn't have to do any of it alone. That conversation gave me the courage to call Julian back and tell him I wanted to move forward with becoming their foster parent. Melody started coming to my house twice a week to do therapy sessions with both kids, since they were too afraid to go anywhere unfamiliar. She'd work with them in the living room while I stayed in the kitchen, teaching them ways to cope when the scary thoughts came back. She spent a lot of time helping them understand that what happened wasn't their fault, that they'd done nothing wrong and their mother's choices were not because of anything they'd done. Watching her work with them gave me hope that maybe they really could heal from this eventually. Prosecutor Enrique showed up one afternoon to talk to me about the trial, explaining that my testimony about the night I rescued the kids would be really important for the case. He seemed confident they had more than enough evidence to convict the mother, but he wanted to make sure the children were protected throughout the whole legal process. He told me they could do video statements instead of making Bonnie and Freddie testify in person, which was a huge relief because I didn't want them anywhere near that courtroom or their mother. Over the next few weeks, Detective Paget kept calling with updates about what they were finding. She came over one afternoon while the kids were doing homework at the kitchen table and asked if we could talk privately. We stepped onto the back porch and she pulled out a folder thick with papers. The mother had been using different names for over 20 years, moving from state to state and leaving people dead behind her every single time. Detective Paget showed me driver's licenses with the same face but 4 completely different names: Sarah Mitchell in Oregon, Jennifer Walsh in Nevada, Catherine Brooks in Arizona, and finally the name I knew her by here. Each identity lasted about 5 years before she disappeared and started fresh somewhere else. The detective explained that they'd connected her to at least 9 suspicious deaths across those 3 states, all following the same pattern of slow poisoning that looked like natural illness. My hands shook as I looked through the documentation. This woman had been perfecting her method for 2 decades, getting better at hiding what she was doing with each new family she destroyed. Detective Paget said investigators were still digging through records trying to figure out if there were even more victims they hadn't found yet. The scope of it made me feel sick. Bonnie started talking more during her therapy sessions with Melody. One afternoon, Melody asked if she could speak with me after the session ended, and the look on her face told me it was something bad. She explained that Bonnie had described how her mother kept a notebook where she wrote down which poisons she'd given them and what symptoms appeared afterward. The mother would test different substances on the kids to see how their bodies reacted, taking notes like she was running some kind of twisted science experiment on her own children. Melody said Bonnie remembered being violently sick multiple times, but her mother would just watch and write things down instead of helping her feel better. Sometimes the mother would give them something that made their stomachs hurt for days. Other times it made them dizzy or gave them headaches that wouldn't stop. Bonnie thought it was normal because it was all she'd ever known. But now she understood her mother had been slowly poisoning them their entire lives. Hearing those details made me want to throw up. Freddie finally started speaking in full sentences instead of just a few words at a time. He'd been so quiet since that first night, barely saying anything beyond yes or no answers. But one evening while we were sitting together on the couch, he suddenly started talking about the day his father died. He told me his dad had found pills hidden in the kitchen cabinet behind the flour container, along with small bottles of clear liquid that weren't supposed to be there. His father had confronted the mother that afternoon, demanding to know what the pills were for and why she was hiding them. Freddie had been upstairs in his room, but he heard them arguing, so he opened his bedroom door just a crack to listen. He watched through that tiny opening as his mother grabbed a knife from the counter and stabbed his father in the chest before he could even react. His dad fell to the floor and the mother just stood there looking at him until he stopped moving. Then she dragged the body out to the car while Freddie hid in his room, too scared to make any sound. The way Freddie described it so calmly, like he was talking about something he'd seen on television instead of his own father's murder, broke my heart into pieces. The FBI showed up about 3 weeks after the initial arrest because the crimes crossed state lines and involved multiple jurisdictions. Agent Bailey Hoover took over coordinating everything, connecting all the different cases across different states into one massive investigation. She was professional but kind, and she spent time explaining to me how they were building the complete picture of what the mother had done over all those years. Agent Bailey said they were working with police departments in Oregon, Nevada, and Arizona to match missing persons reports with the identities the mother had used. She believed there were probably more victims than they'd found so far, and they were checking dental records and DNA evidence to identify everyone who'd been buried on properties the mother had lived at previously. The investigation was going to take months to complete fully, but Agent Bailey assured me they had more than enough evidence already to make sure the mother never got out of prison. Julian helped me start the emergency foster certification process so I could officially become Bonnie and Freddie's foster parent. The paperwork was overwhelming. Pages and pages of forms asking about every detail of my life and background. I had to get fingerprinted, submit to background checks, provide financial statements, and complete training courses on trauma-informed parenting. Julian rushed everything through at an accelerated pace, explaining to the judge that the children were already bonded to me, and separating them now would cause additional trauma they didn't need. The home study inspector came to my house and looked through every room, checking that I had adequate space and safe conditions for 2 children. She asked me dozens of questions about my parenting philosophy and how I plan to handle the kids' trauma symptoms. 3 weeks later, the judge approved temporary placement with me while my full certification went through the normal process. Julian brought over the official paperwork, and I signed it with tears running down my face, knowing these kids were really staying with me. Hadley quit her job and moved in permanently to help me take care of Bonnie and Freddie. She found a remote work position that let her work from home, so she could be there whenever I needed backup with the kids. Having her there made everything easier because raising 2 traumatized children by myself felt impossible some days. Hadley was amazing with them, patient and gentle even when they had meltdowns or nightmares. She helped with homework, made meals, and gave me breaks when I was too exhausted to function. The kids started calling her Aunt Hadley within the first week, and watching them bond with her gave me hope that we could really make this family work. The preliminary hearing happened on a cold morning in late fall. I had to testify about what happened the night I rescued the kids, and I was so nervous I thought I might throw up in the courtroom. The prosecutor asked me to describe everything I'd seen and heard, and I told the truth about how the children had tied me up, because they thought I was working with their mother, how they'd revealed she was poisoning them, and how we'd barely escaped when she came home. The mother sat at the defense table staring at me with pure hatred in her eyes, and I had to force myself to keep talking, even though her glare made my skin crawl. When I described hearing about the father's murder and the other victims buried in the yard, several people in the courtroom gasped. The judge denied bail immediately, stating that the mother was clearly a flight risk and a danger to the community. As the bailiff led her away, she turned and looked right at me with such intense hatred that I started shaking and couldn't stop even after she was gone from the room. Bonnie started sleeping through most nights without waking up screaming. The nightmares still happened sometimes, but they were getting less frequent as the weeks passed. One morning I was making breakfast, and Hadley said something silly about the pancakes looking like alien spaceships. Bonnie actually smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. It was the first time I'd seen her look like a normal, happy kid instead of a traumatized victim. That small moment of joy gave me so much hope that maybe she really could heal from everything that had happened. Freddie's drawing started changing around the same time. For weeks, he'd been drawing dark pictures with scary images that showed the trauma he'd experienced. But then one afternoon, I noticed him working on something different. When he showed me the finished picture, it was our house with flowers growing in the front yard and sunshine coming through the windows. He'd drawn all 4 of us standing together smiling, and he'd written my family across the top in careful letters. Melody said this shift represented his brain starting to feel safe enough to imagine positive futures, instead of just reliving the past. More victims got identified as investigators matched dental records and DNA with missing persons reports from across multiple states. Families who'd been searching for loved ones for years finally got answers about what happened, though the truth was more horrible than anyone had imagined. Agent Bailey called to tell me they'd confirmed 13 victims so far, with several more possibilities still being investigated. Each identification meant another family learning their loved one had been slowly poisoned and buried in a backyard. Another set of people whose lives had been destroyed by the woman who'd lived next door to me. 3 weeks later, the mother's defense team filed motions claiming she was legally insane during the murders. Her lawyers brought in their own psychiatrists who tried to argue she couldn't tell right from wrong. But the prosecution's evaluations told a completely different story. 3 separate doctors examined her over multiple sessions, and all reached the same conclusion. She was perfectly sane and had been planning every murder carefully for years. The evaluations showed she understood exactly what she was doing, knew it was wrong, and did it anyway because she enjoyed it. One psychiatrist explained that she showed clear evidence of planning, covering her tracks and manipulating others to avoid detection. Those behaviors proved she knew her actions were criminal and worked hard to hide them. The judge denied the insanity defense motion after reviewing all the psychiatric reports. Detective Paget called me one afternoon to share new evidence they'd discovered during the property search. Investigators found 3 journals hidden in a locked box buried under the shed floor. The mother had been documenting her murders in disturbing detail for over 20 years. She wrote about watching her victims get sicker, describing their symptoms like a scientist taking notes on an experiment. The journals included dates, dosages of different poisons, and observations about how long each substance took to work. Detective Paget's voice was tight with anger as she read some of the entries over the phone. The mother had written about enjoying the power she felt watching people slowly die while pretending to be their caring friend. She described the thrill of attending funerals and comforting other family members while knowing she'd caused the death. The entries showed she specifically targeted vulnerable people who trusted her easily. Single parents, elderly neighbors, families going through hard times. She'd befriend them, gain their trust, then start poisoning them while playing the helpful neighbor, bringing meals and offering support. Detective Paget said reading those journals was one of the hardest things she'd done in 20 years of police work. 2 months after the kids came to stay with me, I completed my emergency foster certification. Julian had fast-tracked the process given the circumstances and the children's clear attachment to me. The final home study went well, and the social worker wrote a strong recommendation in her report. The judge scheduled a hearing to grant temporary custody officially. I brought Bonnie and Freddie with me to the courthouse for the custody hearing. They sat quietly in the waiting area while I met with Julian to go over the final paperwork. When the judge called us into chambers, both kids held my hands tightly as we walked in together. The judge asked them a few gentle questions about how they felt living with me. Bonnie told her she felt safe for the first time in years. Freddie said I made him breakfast every morning and helped him with his homework. The judge smiled and signed the custody order granting me full temporary guardianship. When we got back to the car, I told them the news officially. They both threw their arms around me at the same time, nearly knocking me over with the force of their hug. Bonnie whispered something against my shoulder that made my heart stop. She called me Mama Lou instead of just Louisa. Freddie repeated it, trying out the name. Mama Lou. I started crying right there in the courthouse parking lot, holding these two brave kids who'd survived something horrible and were choosing to trust me with their hearts. The prosecutor scheduled a meeting to discuss the trial timeline. Enrique sat across from me in his office and spread out a massive file of evidence on his desk. He explained the case was so complex with so many victims that organizing everything would take months. The trial date got set for 4 months away to give his team time to prepare properly. I asked about Bonnie and Freddie having to testify and face their mother in court. Enrique shook his head immediately and said absolutely not. He'd already arranged for video depositions where the kids could give testimony from a safe location with only Melody present. The recordings would be played at trial, so the children never had to be in the same room as their mother again. He promised me he'd do everything possible to protect them from further trauma during the legal process. Melody started a support group for child abuse survivors that met twice a week at her office. She asked if Bonnie might be ready to join and meet other kids who'd been through similar experiences. I talked to Bonnie about it carefully, explaining she'd be with other children who understood what trauma felt like. She was nervous but agreed to try one session. The first meeting was hard and she barely spoke to anyone, but the second week she sat next to a girl named Arky who'd also lost a parent to violence. They colored together quietly while the other kids talked. By the fourth session, Bonnie was participating in group activities and even smiled at something another kid said. Melody told me later that Bonnie was starting to trust that not every adult would hurt her. She was learning that some grown-ups actually kept kids safe like they were supposed to. Watching her make friends with other survivors gave me hope that she could build normal relationships eventually. One evening, about 3 months after they came to live with us, Freddie appeared in the kitchen doorway while I was making dinner. Hadley was setting the table and Bonnie was doing homework at the counter. Freddie walked up to me and tugged on my sleeve to get my attention. He looked up at me with those serious eyes and asked if he could call me Mom instead of Mama Lou. His voice was small and uncertain, like he was afraid I might say no. I knelt down so we were eye level and told him yes, of course he could. I'd be honored to be his mom. He hugged me tight and I felt tears streaming down my face again. Hadley came over and Freddie looked at her shyly. He asked if she could be Aunt Hadley officially. She scooped him up and spun him around, saying she'd been waiting for him to ask. Bonnie watched all this from her seat and then announced she wanted to call me Mom too. Just like that, we became a real family with official names and roles. The structure seemed to help both kids feel more secure, like they finally belonged somewhere permanent. The community response to our situation was overwhelming in the best way possible. Neighbors started a meal train that delivered dinner to our house 3 times a week. People donated clothes, toys, and school supplies for the kids. Several parents from Freddie's school offered to babysit anytime I needed a break. The local church organized a fundraiser that raised enough money to cover therapy costs for the next year. Complete strangers sent gift cards and encouraging notes. One woman who'd followed the case in the news sent a care package with books and games for Bonnie and Freddie. The support helped me manage the enormous responsibility of caring for 2 kids with severe trauma while preparing to testify at trial. I couldn't have done it alone, and I didn't have to because the whole community wrapped around us with help. Agent Bailey called with an update on the full scope of the investigation. Her team had identified 17 confirmed victims across 4 different states. The murders spanned 23 years, starting when the mother was only 22 years old. She'd been killing for longer than I'd been alive. Bailey explained the mother had moved frequently, changing identities and starting over in new communities where no one knew her history. She'd perfect her methods in one location, then move before anyone connected the deaths. In each place, she'd target vulnerable families, gain their trust, and start poisoning them slowly. The early murders were less sophisticated, but she got better at it over time. By the time she moved to our neighborhood, she'd refined her techniques to the point where doctors rarely suspected anything beyond natural illness. Bailey said the mother had gotten bolder with each successful kill, taking more risks because she believed she was too smart to get caught. 4 months after that terrible night, Bonnie's nightmares started happening less often. She'd wake up screaming maybe once a week instead of every night. During the day, she started talking about normal kid things she wanted to try. One morning at breakfast, she asked if I could teach her to ride a bike like the other kids in the neighborhood. Another time she mentioned wanting to get a dog someday, maybe a golden retriever. These small hopes about the future showed me her brain was starting to believe she had a future worth planning for. Melody said this shift represented huge progress in Bonnie's healing. She was moving from survival mode into actually living again. The video depositions took place at a child advocacy center designed to be comfortable and non-threatening. Melody accompanied both kids into the interview room while the lawyers and court reporter set up equipment. I waited in the observation room watching through one-way glass as Bonnie went first. She sat in a big comfortable chair holding a stuffed animal Melody had given her. The prosecutor asked questions gently, and Bonnie answered in a clear, steady voice. She told the whole story about the poisoning, finding her father, and the night I came to babysit. Her hands shook sometimes, but she kept talking, describing everything she'd witnessed. When it was Freddie's turn, he brought one of his drawings to hold. He explained what their mother had done with heartbreaking honesty, his voice never wavering even though tears ran down his face. Both kids were incredibly brave, telling their truth despite being terrified. After the depositions ended, Enrique told me their testimony was powerful and would be crucial evidence at trial. The jury would see exactly what these children survived and how credible their accounts were. 2 weeks after the depositions, Freddie spent an entire week drawing pictures that looked completely different from anything he'd created before. Instead of the dark scenes with shadows and fear, his papers filled up with bright colors showing our house, the three of us together, flowers in the yard. He drew me and Hadley making breakfast while he and Bonnie sat at the table smiling. He drew all 4 of us playing board games in the living room. Every single picture showed normal family life, the kind of life he was finally starting to believe could be real and permanent. Melody came by on Friday to check on both kids, and I showed her Freddie's artwork from the week. She looked through each drawing carefully, then smiled in a way that told me this meant something important. She explained that Freddie's brain was learning to process his trauma as something that happened in the past, rather than something still threatening him in the present. The shift in his artwork showed he was building new neural pathways focused on safety and connection, instead of danger and survival. This milestone represented huge progress in his healing journey. 3 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom for the pretrial hearing, my hands shaking as I waited to testify. Enrique had prepared me for what would happen, explaining that the defense lawyer would try to make me look unreliable or confused about what I witnessed that night. The mother sat at the defense table in a nice suit, looking nothing like the person who'd tried to kill me and her own children. Her lawyer stood up and started asking me questions in a tone that suggested I was either lying or mistaken about everything. He implied I'd misunderstood the children's fear, that I'd overreacted to a normal family situation, that my memory of events couldn't be trusted because I was panicking. I answered each question as calmly as I could, sticking to the facts of what I saw and heard. Then Paget took the stand after me and presented her investigation findings. She had documentation for every single detail I'd reported from that night, including the duct tape residue on the kitchen chair, the knife block positioning, the children's statements that matched my account perfectly, and the father's body in the car trunk exactly where the kids said it would be. The judge listened to both testimonies and ruled that my account was completely reliable and admissible as evidence. The defense lawyer sat down looking frustrated while Enrique gave me a small nod across the courtroom. 2 days after the hearing, Enrique called and asked me to come to his office for an important meeting. I drove downtown feeling nervous about what he needed to discuss. He sat me down in his conference room and explained that the defense team had offered a plea deal. The mother was willing to plead guilty to multiple murder charges in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. She'd receive life in prison without any possibility of parole instead. Enrique said the deal also required her to provide detailed information about any additional victims whose bodies hadn't been found yet, which could give other families closure. He told me that as the children's legal guardian now, he wanted my input on whether to accept the deal or proceed to trial. A trial could take years with appeals, and would require Bonnie and Freddie to potentially testify again, keeping them connected to their mother's case throughout their childhood. The plea deal would end everything quickly, and guarantee she'd never get out of prison. That evening, I sat down with Bonnie and Freddie in the living room to talk about the decision. I explained in simple terms that their mother's lawyers wanted to make a deal where she'd admit to hurting people and go to prison forever without us having to go through a big trial. I told them a trial meant they might have to answer more questions and wait a long time for everything to be finished. Freddie looked at Bonnie and they had one of their silent conversations. Then Bonnie asked me if the deal meant their mother could never come back. I promised her that life without parole meant she'd stay in prison for the rest of her life, that she could never hurt them or anyone else again. Freddie said he didn't want to talk about her anymore, that he wanted it to be over, so we could just be a normal family. Bonnie agreed, saying she was tired of being scared and wanted to move forward. I called Enrique that night and told him we supported accepting the plea deal as long as it included information about other victims. The allocution hearing happened 2 weeks later in a packed courtroom. I sat in the back row while the mother stood before the judge in prison clothes and handcuffs. The judge asked if she understood she was giving up her right to trial by accepting this plea agreement. She said yes in a flat voice that showed no emotion at all. Then the judge asked her to allocate, to admit in her own words what she'd done. She started speaking in that same emotionless tone, admitting to 14 murders over 23 years. She listed names, dates, methods of poisoning, and locations where she'd buried bodies. She described 3 additional victims whose remains had never been recovered, and provided detailed information about where she'd disposed of them. Her voice never wavered or changed, like she was reading a grocery list instead of confessing to destroying families and ending lives. She showed absolutely no remorse, no guilt, no recognition that the people she'd killed mattered. The courtroom stayed completely silent except for her voice, and I felt sick listening to her talk about murder like it was nothing more than a task she'd completed. Several family members of victims sat in the front rows crying quietly while she spoke. When the allocution finished, the judge asked if anyone wanted to make a statement before sentencing. Several family members stood up and talked about the people they'd lost, the years of not knowing what happened, the pain of finally learning the truth. Then the judge announced the sentence: life in prison without possibility of parole on each murder count, with all sentences running consecutively. The mother would spend the rest of her life behind bars with no chance of ever being released. As the bailiff moved to escort her out of the courtroom, she suddenly turned and tried to say something toward where she thought the children might be sitting. The bailiff immediately blocked her view and firmly guided her toward the door, while she kept trying to look around him. She was removed from the courtroom before she could say whatever she'd wanted to tell them. Bonnie and Freddie watched the entire sentencing from a private room on a video monitor with Melody sitting between them for support. I joined them right after the mother was taken away. When the video ended and the screen went dark, both kids let out these long exhales like they'd been holding their breath for months. Freddie leaned against me and said in a quiet voice that the monster was locked away now and couldn't hurt anyone else ever again. Bonnie nodded and squeezed my hand tight. Melody explained that this moment marked an important turning point in their healing, because the threat was officially gone, and they could start building their future without fear hanging over them. The following week, we started trauma-focused therapy as a family unit instead of just individual sessions for the kids. Melody guided all of us through exercises about building healthy attachment after severe trauma. We learned how to support each other when someone was having a hard day, how to communicate needs clearly, how to recognize when old trauma responses were showing up, so we could address them together. She taught us that becoming a real family meant choosing to stay connected even when things got difficult, that love was both a feeling and a series of actions we took every day. The sessions helped me understand how to parent children who'd experienced things no kid should ever go through, and they helped Bonnie and Freddie learn that families could be safe places instead of sources of danger. 6 months after that terrible night when everything started, I filed a formal petition to adopt Bonnie and Freddie. Julian came to my house with all the paperwork and sat at my kitchen table going through every form. He'd prepared a detailed report documenting the amazing progress both children had made in my care, including statements from Melody about their healing, school reports showing their academic success, and his own observations about the strong bonds we'd formed as a family. He told me he'd never seen a foster placement work out so perfectly, that it was clear these kids belonged with me permanently. We submitted everything to the court and waited for the adoption hearing date. The adoption hearing took place on a sunny morning in late spring. I dressed Bonnie and Freddie in nice clothes and we drove to the courthouse together holding hands. Hadley came with us for support. We sat in the courtroom while the judge reviewed Julian's report and all the documentation about our family. She asked Bonnie and Freddie if they wanted me to be their mother forever, and they both said yes immediately without any hesitation. The judge smiled and said she'd reviewed hundreds of adoption cases in her career, but had never seen children more clearly bonded to their parent than Bonnie and Freddie were to me. She granted the adoption right there, declaring that Bonnie and Freddie were now legally my children with all the rights and protections that came with that status. We all cried happy tears while the judge signed the final papers making our family official. We left the courthouse that afternoon and drove straight home to find Hadley had already set up a small celebration in our living room. She'd invited Detective Paget, Julian, Melody, and a couple of close friends who'd supported us through everything. Bonnie and Freddie ran inside carrying their official adoption certificates like trophies, showing everyone the papers that proved we were a real family now. Hadley had made cupcakes and hung up streamers. Nothing fancy, but exactly what we needed to mark this moment. Detective Paget brought small gifts for both kids, stuffed animals they immediately hugged tight. Melody sat on the floor with Bonnie looking through a photo album we'd started making of our family memories. Julian shook my hand and told me he'd never seen a foster case turn out so perfectly. Then Hadley started doing silly voices and making funny faces while trying to get the kids to smile for pictures. Bonnie suddenly burst out laughing, a real genuine laugh that filled the whole room. I felt something loosen in my chest hearing that sound, knowing she was finally starting to feel safe enough to just be a kid. Freddie joined in laughing too, and soon we were all cracking up at Hadley's ridiculous impressions. The party lasted a few hours with everyone eating cupcakes and sharing stories about how far we'd come since that terrible night months ago. 2 weeks later, Freddie started attending regular school for the first time in his life. His mother had kept him isolated at home, never letting him interact with other kids or teachers. He picked out a new backpack and lunchbox the day before, so excited he could barely sleep that night. Melody had spent weeks working with the school to make sure they understood his background and trauma history. The principal, teachers, and counselor all knew to watch for signs he was struggling and had plans in place to support him. I walked him to his classroom that first morning, and he squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. His teacher welcomed him warmly and introduced him to the other students. I could see he was nervous, but also genuinely excited to finally be around kids his own age. When I picked him up that afternoon, he talked nonstop about everything he'd learned and done. He'd made a friend named Marky who liked drawing just like him. The teacher said he participated well and seemed eager to learn. Over the following weeks, he settled into the routine beautifully, coming home each day with stories about his classes and new friends. Around the same time, Bonnie started taking riding lessons at a therapeutic center that worked with kids who'd been through trauma. The place specialized in using horses to help children build confidence and process difficult emotions. Her first day, she was quiet and hesitant, standing at the fence watching the horses move around the paddock. The instructor was patient, letting Bonnie take her time approaching the animals. By her third lesson, she was brushing and feeding a gentle brown mare. By the fifth lesson, she was actually riding, sitting tall in the saddle with the biggest smile on her face. She named her favorite horse Hope, and every single one of us watching understood what that meant. This little girl who'd survived so much horror was choosing to believe in better things ahead. She went to lessons twice a week, and I could see her confidence growing each time. She started standing straighter, speaking up more, trusting that good things could happen to her. The instructor told me Bonnie had a natural way with the horses, that they responded to her gentle approach. One evening, Detective Paget stopped by our house unannounced. The kids tensed up when they saw her car pull into the driveway, old fear responses kicking in automatically. But she came bearing pizza and told them she just wanted to check on how they were doing. We all sat around the kitchen table eating while she gave us an update on the investigation. All the evidence had been processed and the case was officially closed. She looked directly at Bonnie and Freddie and told them they were the bravest kids she'd ever met. She explained that by telling the truth about what their mother had done, they'd saved other people's lives. Their mother would have kept killing if they hadn't spoken up. She said sometimes being brave means being scared but doing the right thing anyway, and that's exactly what they'd done. Freddie asked if their mother could ever get out of prison. Detective Paget promised them she'd be locked away for the rest of her life, that she could never hurt anyone again. That conversation seemed to lift a weight off both kids, giving them the closure they needed to really start moving forward. A month later, we attended a memorial service for all 17 victims the investigation had identified. Families gathered from different states to honor their lost loved ones, and finally get some answers about what had happened. The service took place at a community center with photos of each victim displayed around the room. Bonnie and Freddie were nervous about going, but Melody thought it would help them see they weren't alone in this, that other families understood their pain. Several family members approached us during the reception afterward. An older woman whose daughter had disappeared 5 years ago hugged Bonnie and thanked her for being brave enough to tell the truth. A man who'd lost his son told Freddie that his courage had brought justice for so many people. Another mother whose whole family had been killed shook my hand with tears in her eyes, thanking me for protecting the kids and making sure their mother faced consequences. The memorial was hard, but also healing in its own way, connecting us to other survivors and victims' families who truly understood what we'd been through. On the drive home from the memorial, Bonnie was quiet in the back seat staring out the window. Then she suddenly spoke up and said she wanted to help other kids someday, who were too scared to tell the truth about abuse. She was only 9 years old, but already thinking about how to turn her trauma into something that could help others. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror and saw real determination in her eyes. She said maybe she could talk to kids who were going through bad things and show them it was okay to ask for help. Freddie nodded and said he wanted to help too, that maybe they could both do something to make sure other kids didn't have to suffer like they had. I told them that was an amazing goal, and that when they were older, we'd figure out ways they could share their story to help others. Melody later told me this kind of thinking showed incredible strength, that many trauma survivors eventually find purpose in helping others heal. A full year passed since that night when everything started. Our family had transformed in ways I never could have imagined back then. The kids were healthy now, having gained weight and color in their cheeks. They were happy most days, laughing and playing like normal children. They still had hard moments when old fears surfaced, but they'd learned to talk about their feelings and ask for help when they needed it. They trusted that this safety and love we'd built together wasn't temporary, that I wasn't going anywhere. Hadley had become an amazing co-parent, providing stability and support that made everything easier. She had a natural way with the kids, knowing when to be silly and when to be serious. The four of us had created real family bonds, choosing each other every single day. We had routines and traditions now, weekly movie nights and Sunday morning pancakes. We celebrated birthdays and holidays together. We supported each other through good days and bad days. This was what family was supposed to feel like, and all of us knew how lucky we were to have found it. Freddie brought home his report card one afternoon and practically ran through the front door waving it in the air. He'd made honor roll for the first time, straight A's and B's across every subject. His teachers had written comments about how kind he was to other students, how creative and helpful he'd become in class. The scared, silent boy from that first terrible night had grown into a confident young person who smiled easily and made friends naturally. I hung his report card on the refrigerator with magnets and took him out for ice cream to celebrate. He told me about a science project he was working on and a book he was reading for English class. He had hopes and dreams now, talking about maybe becoming an artist or a teacher when he grew up. Watching him thrive like this made every hard moment of the past year worth it. He'd been given a chance to just be a kid, to learn and grow in safety, and he was taking full advantage of it. Bonnie had been asking about getting a dog for months. Melody thought it would be good for her, that caring for an animal could help build her sense of capability and provide emotional support. We visited the local shelter together, and Bonnie immediately connected with a gentle mixed breed who'd been rescued from a bad situation just like her. She named him Lucky, and from that first day, they were inseparable. Lucky slept in her room and followed her everywhere around the house. Bonnie took full responsibility for feeding him, walking him, and training him. She worked with a professional trainer to teach Lucky basic commands and good behavior. The process of training Lucky seemed to help Bonnie feel more in control of her own life, showing her she could be patient and kind while still setting boundaries. Lucky became her constant companion, seeming to sense when she was having a hard day and staying close to comfort her. I'd often find them curled up together, Bonnie reading aloud while Lucky rested his head on her lap. We took our first real family vacation that summer, driving to the beach for a long weekend. Neither Bonnie nor Freddie had ever seen the ocean before. When we finally arrived and they caught their first glimpse of the water stretching endlessly toward the horizon, their faces lit up with pure wonder. They ran down to the sand immediately, kicking off their shoes and racing toward the waves. I stood back with Hadley watching them play, splashing in the shallow water and collecting shells. They built sand castles and buried each other in sand and chased seagulls along the shore. They looked like completely different children from the scared, traumatized kids I'd met a year ago. These were happy, free children who trusted the world enough to play and explore. That evening we had dinner at a seafood restaurant and the kids tried new foods without fear, knowing nothing they ate would hurt them. We walked on the beach after sunset, the four of us holding hands and talking about our favorite parts of the day. I looked at my family, this beautiful, unexpected family we'd built from tragedy and trauma, and felt grateful for every moment that had led us here. Our last therapy session with Melody happened on a sunny Thursday morning in her cozy office. The kids sat comfortably on the floor playing with building blocks while Melody and I talked, something that would have been impossible a year ago when they couldn't stand to be separated from me even for a minute. Melody watched them build a tower together, working as a team and laughing when it fell over. She turned to me with a smile that reached her eyes and told me our family had done something most people thought couldn't happen after trauma this severe. We'd built real attachment, the secure kind that would let these kids grow up knowing they were safe and loved. She said she was completely confident they'd keep getting better with the foundation we'd worked so hard to create. Bonnie looked up right then and asked if we could get ice cream after this, her voice light and normal like any other kid asking for a treat. That moment felt like proof of everything Melody was saying. 2 years had passed since that horrible night when I'd grabbed 2 terrified kids and run for our lives. Now I stood in Bonnie's doorway watching her arrange her stuffed animals on shelves painted the purple she'd picked out herself. Books lined another wall, some we'd read together 100 times. Freddie's room across the hall had posters of planets and rockets covering the blue walls, his drawings scattered across his desk. I tucked Bonnie in first, pulling her favorite blanket up around her shoulders. She wrapped her arms around my neck tight and whispered that she loved me. Freddie did the same when I sat on his bed, his hug fierce and real. Walking back downstairs, I felt something settle deep in my chest, a certainty I'd never experienced before. We were going to be okay, truly okay. We'd survived the absolute worst thing I could imagine and somehow built something beautiful and strong from those ashes. That's what family really meant. Not blood or biology, choosing each other every single day and building safety together. The nightmares still came sometimes and hard days happened, but we faced everything as a team now. These kids were mine and I was theirs and nothing would ever change that truth.